The morning of the execution arrived beneath a sky the color of old iron. Cold mist rolled across Blackthorn Square, creeping between the wooden stalls and stone buildings that surrounded the public scaffold. The crowd had begun gathering before dawn. Bakers, laborers, merchants, widows, servants. Some had come for justice. Some had come for spectacle. Most had come because public executions possessed a terrible gravity that pulled people toward them whether they wished it or not. At the center of the square stood the gallows. The platform was dark with age. The rope hung motionless. Waiting. Evelyn Hart stood beneath it with her hands bound before her. 24 years old. Widowed. Condemned. Officially, she was the woman who had murdered her husband. Unofficially, she had become something much more useful. A story. The newspapers had called her heartless. The magistrates had called her dangerous. The public called her the widow murderess. None of them had ever met her. Evelyn stared straight ahead. Her prison dress hung loosely from her thin frame. Weeks in confinement had stolen weight from her face but not dignity. Her dark hair had been pinned back carelessly by the prison matron. A bruise lingered near her left temple, yellowing with age. She had stopped caring about appearances 11 days ago. The prison chaplain stood beside her. "Would you like to pray?" "No." The old man hesitated. "Are you afraid?" She considered the question. No. It was the truth. Fear required uncertainty. She knew exactly what was about to happen. The crowd shifted. A murmur swept through the square. Heads turned toward the northern road. Something was happening. The sheriff frowned. The executioner paused. A line of black carriages emerged from the fog. Not ordinary carriages. Aristocratic. Expensive. Powerful. The lead carriage bore a crest few people in England failed to recognize. A silver wolf upon a field of midnight blue. The crest of Wrentham. The crowd immediately parted. Conversations died. Even the sheriff straightened. The carriage rolled to a stop. A footman descended first. Then another. Then the door opened. The man who stepped into the square seemed to bring silence with him. James Cavendish. Duke of Wrentham. 37 years old. The wealthiest duke in northern England. The most feared man in 3 counties. Not feared because he was cruel. Feared because he was effective. Judges feared him. Bankers feared him. Politicians feared him. Corrupt men feared him most of all. James Cavendish had built a reputation for discovering truths powerful people preferred hidden. He walked through the crowd without hurry. Tall. Dark-haired. Impeccably dressed in a black greatcoat despite the cold. His expression revealed nothing. The sheriff descended the scaffold immediately. "Your Grace." The Duke nodded. "You are proceeding with the execution?" The sheriff blinked. "Of course." "On what evidence?" The question produced visible discomfort. Several magistrates exchanged glances. The sheriff cleared his throat. "The evidence presented at trial." "I have read the trial." The Duke's voice remained calm. The sheriff suddenly looked less confident. James turned his gaze toward the woman standing beneath the gallows. For the first time. Evelyn looked back at him. Neither looked away. Something passed between them. Recognition perhaps. Not of identity. Of character. The Duke saw no panic. No pleading. No desperation. Only exhaustion. And something else. Resignation. As though she had already accepted death and was merely waiting for everyone else to catch up. Interesting. Very interesting. James stepped onto the platform. The crowd gasped. The sheriff followed nervously. "Your Grace, what exactly are you doing?" I dislike unfinished questions. The Duke stopped directly before Evelyn. She remained still. Mrs. Hart. Your Grace. You maintain your innocence. Yes. You did not kill your husband. No. You understand nobody believes you. A faint smile touched her lips. That is no longer my concern. The answer surprised him. Most condemned prisoners begged. Most cried. Most raged. This woman seemed beyond all three. James studied her carefully. Then something caught his attention. A mark. Just visible above the neckline of her prison dress. A scar. Old. Pale. Unmistakable. His eyes narrowed. How did you receive that injury? The smile disappeared instantly. For the first time, emotion crossed her face. Not fear. Warning. I fail to see how that matters. The Duke continued looking. Years of investigation had trained him to notice details others missed. One scar was rarely one scar. One scar usually meant more. Much more. He looked toward the matron. You. The woman jumped. Your Grace. Has the prisoner been medically examined? Yes. The answer came reluctantly. James heard it immediately. Reluctantly. The most revealing answers often were. By whom? The matron hesitated. The Duke's eyes hardened. Answer. A prison physician. Report. There was no report. Now silence spread across the scaffold. James turned slowly toward the sheriff. No report. The sheriff suddenly found the fog fascinating. That is, not unusual. It is extremely unusual. The Duke stepped closer to Evelyn. Mrs. Hart. She said nothing. How many scars are there? Her jaw tightened. The crowd watched in complete silence. Seconds passed. Then she spoke. Enough. The word landed like a stone. Not dramatic. Not emotional. Simply factual. Enough. The Duke felt something shift inside his mind. A puzzle piece moving. Not into place. Toward place. Enough for what? Evelyn looked away. Toward the rope hanging above them. Toward the death waiting a few feet away. When she finally answered, her voice was quiet. Enough to know my husband was not the victim everyone believes he was. The square went completely silent. No one moved. No one breathed. The sheriff looked horrified. The magistrates looked nervous. The crowd leaned forward. James Cavendish stared at the woman beneath the gallows. And for the first time since arriving that morning, he began to suspect the court had condemned the wrong person. Then a voice erupted from the crowd. She's lying. A young aristocrat pushed forward. Well-dressed. Angry. Desperate. James recognized him immediately. Thomas Hart. The dead man's younger brother. The primary witness at trial. The witch murdered my brother. The Duke's eyes settled upon him. Thomas immediately looked less certain. Interesting. Very interesting. Because for a single second, when Evelyn mentioned the scars, Thomas Hart had not looked angry. He had looked afraid. And James Cavendish trusted fear far more than testimony. The Duke slowly turned back toward the condemned woman. Then he noticed something else. Her wrists. Not the rope. Not the bindings. The old marks beneath them. Years old. Repeated. Patterned. The kind of marks produced by restraint. The kind no husband should ever leave upon his wife. A cold certainty began forming. The execution suddenly felt less like justice. And much more like the final stage of a cover-up. The Duke's gaze hardened. Stop the execution. The sheriff froze. The crowd exploded into chaos. And Evelyn Hart, standing beneath the gallows with death only minutes away, stared at him as though she could not decide whether she had just been saved, or whether something far more dangerous had entered her life. The journey from Blackthorn Square to Wrentham House lasted 4 hours. Not because the distance demanded it. Because James Cavendish spent the first hour stopping 3 separate officials from attempting to reclaim his prisoner. The Lord Magistrate arrived first. The Crown Prosecutor arrived second. A representative from the Home Office appeared shortly afterward. All 3 discovered that arguing with the Duke of Wrentham was a profoundly unpleasant experience. By noon, Evelyn Hart sat alone inside the Duke's carriage while a storm of legal correspondence spread across half the county. She stared through the window. Fields passed. Villages passed. Trees stripped bare by winter passed. For the first time in 11 days, she was no longer heading toward death. She still had not decided whether that was an improvement. The carriage door opened during a brief stop. The Duke entered. He sat opposite her. Neither spoke immediately. James studied the woman he had removed from a gallows less than 4 hours earlier. She had been offered food. She had barely touched it. She had been offered tea. The cup remained untouched beside her. She sat with the same stillness she had displayed beneath the execution platform. Not calm. Controlled. The difference mattered. People who were calm did not sit like that. People who were surviving did. Finally he spoke. Why didn't you mention the scars during the trial? Her eyes remained fixed on the passing countryside. Because nobody asked. Your solicitor failed you. A faint laugh escaped her. It contained no humor. I did not have a solicitor. James frowned. What do you mean? I mean the court assigned one for 27 minutes before sentencing. The Duke's expression darkened. 27 minutes. Not enough time to defend a stolen loaf of bread. Certainly not enough time to defend a murder charge. Interesting. The case became uglier with every answer. You still haven't explained the scars. Now she turned toward him. Her eyes were remarkably clear. No tears. No self-pity. Only exhaustion. My husband enjoyed discipline. The words landed heavily. James said nothing. She continued. He believed obedience was evidence of affection. The Duke's jaw tightened. Still she spoke without emotion. As though describing weather. Some men drink. She looked back toward the window. Some gamble. Silence. My husband preferred ownership. The carriage became very quiet. James had investigated corruption. Fraud. Political conspiracies. Financial crimes. He had encountered cruelty before. But cruelty inside marriage occupied a different category entirely. Because society protected it. Respected it. Excused it. How long? Her answer arrived immediately. 6 years. 6 years. The Duke felt genuine anger for the first time. Not theatrical anger. Not public anger. The dangerous kind. The kind he kept hidden. The carriage continued through the winter countryside. Eventually Wrentham House appeared on the horizon. Evelyn understood immediately why people spoke of it with such reverence. It was enormous. Grey stone rising against the winter sky. For centuries of wealth and power transformed into architecture. Her former husband's estate suddenly seemed small. The carriage stopped. Servants appeared. Doors opened. Luggage was carried inside. Evelyn remained seated. The Duke noticed. You are not moving. No. Why? She met his gaze. Because I don't understand the arrangement. The honesty surprised him. Neither do I. That answer surprised her. James stepped from the carriage. Then extended a hand. After a moment she accepted it. Wrentham House swallowed them. The entrance hall alone could have housed her entire childhood home. Staff lined both sides of the corridor. Not staring. Observing. Professional curiosity disguised as etiquette. The Duke ignored them. Evelyn Hart will be staying here as my guest. A ripple passed through the servants. Nobody questioned him. Nobody ever questioned him. A housekeeper appeared. Efficient. Capable. Middle-aged. The sort of woman who had likely run Wrentham House better than any duke. Mrs. Hart. Her voice carried kindness. A dangerous thing. Kindness often broke people faster than cruelty. Your room is prepared. Evelyn nodded. The housekeeper guided her upstairs. James watched her disappear. Then turned toward his steward. Everything. The steward blinked. Your Grace. Everything connected to Henry Hart. The steward immediately understood. The financial records? Yes. The court transcripts? Yes. The medical reports? Especially those. The steward hesitated. There are no medical reports. James smiled. Not pleasantly. No. His eyes hardened. That is precisely the problem. By evening the investigation had begun. The Duke occupied a large study overlooking the northern grounds. Files covered the desk. Witness statements. Court records. Newspaper reports. Correspondence. He read everything. Twice. Three things became immediately obvious. First. The prosecution case was extraordinarily weak. Second. The judge had rushed the proceedings. Third. Nearly every witness worked directly for Henry Hart. That bothered him. Deeply. Around midnight another file arrived. A simple employment ledger. Nothing remarkable. At first. Then James noticed something. Staff turnover. He stared. Read again. Then again. In 6 years Henry Hart had employed 43 servants. 43. A normal household of that size should have retained most staff for decades. Instead they left constantly. Maids. Footmen. Gardeners. Housekeepers. Stable boys. Cook's assistants. Everyone left. The pattern was impossible to ignore. People fled that house. Why? The answer arrived the following morning. A former maid named Sarah Wilkes. The Duke paid her travel expenses and brought her to Wrentham House personally. She entered his study trembling. Not nervous. Terrified. James had seen fear often. This was different. The woman looked like someone expecting punishment. Miss Wilkes. She sat carefully. Your Grace. You worked for Henry Hart. Her hands immediately tightened. Interesting. Very interesting. Yes. For how long? 9 months. Why did you leave? The woman stared at the floor. Silence. James waited. Finally she whispered. I wasn't dismissed. No. She shook her head. I escaped. The room became very still. Escaped. Tears appeared instantly. I couldn't stay. What happened? The maid looked physically ill. Then she whispered something so quietly James almost missed it. He liked hurting people. The Duke said nothing. Not just her. The woman swallowed hard. Everyone. Silence. Then another voice spoke from the doorway. Evelyn. Neither had noticed her arrival. She stood motionless. Watching. Listening. Sarah immediately looked terrified. Evelyn crossed the room. Then did something unexpected. She knelt beside the former maid. Not above her. Beside her. You don't have to be afraid anymore. The woman began crying. Not dramatic tears. Relief. Years of it. The Duke watched both women carefully. A picture was beginning to emerge. A terrible picture. But incomplete. Still incomplete. Then Sarah whispered something that changed everything. There was a room. Evelyn froze. The maid immediately regretted speaking. James noticed. What room? Neither woman answered. The silence lasted nearly 20 seconds. Then Evelyn closed her eyes. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. The locked room. The Duke felt every instinct sharpen. What locked room? Her eyes opened. For the first time since the execution, genuine fear appeared in them. Not fear for herself. Fear of memory. Fear of what came next. And James suddenly understood. Whatever happened inside that room was the reason Henry Hart was dead. James Ashcroft, Duke of Blackthorn, had executed men before. Not personally. The law performed its own violence. Judges signed documents. Magistrates issued warrants. Prison officials carried out sentences. But he had delivered people to that machinery. He had exposed frauds. Destroyed criminal enterprises. Sent aristocrats and common men alike into courtrooms where evidence left no room for escape. He had never once doubted the process. Until today. The prison physician arrived 40 minutes after Eleanor was returned to her cell. By then James had already reviewed every available document connected to the case twice. The physician was nervous. Not because James was a duke. Because James was known for something far more dangerous than rank. He noticed details. And men who noticed details were difficult to deceive. The physician placed a folder on the table. James opened it. Inside were records from Eleanor's examination following her arrest. His eyes moved quickly across the pages. Then stopped. He read the same line twice. Then a third time. The room became very quiet. What is this? The physician swallowed. A notation, Your Grace. James looked up slowly. A notation. Yes. James tapped the page. The physician visibly paled. Because the notation described extensive scar tissue across Eleanor's back. Not recent. Not accidental. Years old. Repeated injuries. Patterns consistent with long-term physical abuse. James closed the folder. Very carefully. When was this documented? The day she entered Newgate. And the court was informed? The physician hesitated. No, Your Grace. Silence. James stared at him. The physician immediately looked away. Why? It was not considered relevant. James felt something cold settle into his chest. Not anger. Not yet. Something worse. The realization that an entire legal proceeding had ignored evidence because it complicated the preferred narrative. The physician continued nervously. Lord Ashworth's reputation was excellent. James said nothing. Miss Whitmore's background was less influential. Still silence. The prosecution focused on motive. James slowly stood. The physician stepped backward instinctively. James was not a physically intimidating man in the conventional sense. But there was a stillness about him. A kind of controlled force. The sort that made people imagine how terrible it would be if it ever broke. The prosecution, James said quietly, ignored evidence of prolonged abuse. The physician said nothing. The court ignored it. Silence. The investigators ignored it. The physician looked at the floor. James picked up the folder. Every instinct he possessed told him something was profoundly wrong. Not merely incomplete. Wrong. A murder case built around a narrative. A convenient narrative. A young governess kills her employer after an argument. Simple. Clean. Easy. But reality was rarely easy. Reality left traces. And traces were beginning to appear. He turned toward the prison governor. I want access to Lord Whitmore's estate. Today. Immediately. That may be difficult. James looked at him. The governor instantly regretted speaking. I'll arrange it. Good. The governor hurried away. James remained alone with the folder. His gaze returned to the notation. Scar tissue. Extensive. Repeated. Years old. The description was clinical. Detached. Almost casual. But James had seen enough investigations to understand what it meant. Someone had hurt Eleanor repeatedly. For years. And somehow that fact had never mattered. His jaw tightened. Because suddenly he wanted to know something. Not whether Eleanor had killed her husband. Not whether she was innocent. Something else. Who had given her those scars? And why had nobody cared? The answer arrived 3 hours later. Whitmore Hall stood on the edge of Yorkshire moorland like a dying memory. Large. Impressive. Empty. The sort of estate built by generations of inherited wealth and maintained by generations of inherited cruelty. James arrived with 2 solicitors and a magistrate. The servants looked terrified. Not of him. Of what his presence meant. The housekeeper greeted them. An elderly woman. Gray-haired. Tired. James introduced himself. The woman immediately began crying. That interested him. Because innocent households rarely reacted that way. Mrs. Palmer. Your Grace. You knew Eleanor Whitmore. The woman nodded. Since she was 15. James studied her. Tell me about her husband. The crying became worse. That answered more than words could. Still. He waited. Eventually she managed to speak. Lord Whitmore was a monster. The words emerged with startling certainty. No hesitation. No doubt. Just truth. James felt his suspicions harden. Explain. Mrs. Palmer sat slowly. As though carrying years of exhaustion. He liked obedience. James said nothing. He liked control. Still silence. He liked pain. The room became very still. One solicitor stopped writing. The other looked sick. Mrs. Palmer continued. He chose wives the way some men choose horses. James's expression darkened. Eleanor was his second. Second. The first died. The words landed heavily. James stared at her. How? No one knows. That answer was unacceptable. And everyone present knew it. Mrs. Palmer lowered her eyes. They said fever. You disagree? Yes. James folded his hands behind his back. Tell me everything. So she did. For 2 hours. And each detail made the story uglier. Whitmore had isolated Eleanor from friends. Controlled her correspondence. Monitored her movements. Punished perceived disobedience. Servants had heard screams. Seen bruises. Observed injuries explained away as accidents. And through all of it Eleanor had endured quietly. Protecting people. Helping servants. Managing household finances. Trying to survive. James listened without interruption. By the end of the second hour something had changed. This was no longer an investigation. It was becoming personal. Not because Eleanor was beautiful, or tragic, or innocent. Because she had been abandoned by every system designed to protect her. And James hated systemic failure more than almost anything. The final revelation came from a locked desk drawer. A diary. Hidden beneath false panels. Written in Eleanor's hand. The first entry was dated 3 years earlier. The last was 6 weeks before her arrest. James opened it carefully. The room fell silent. He began reading. 5 minutes later nobody moved. 10 minutes later one solicitor sat down because his legs no longer seemed reliable. 15 minutes later James closed the diary. Very slowly. The entries described everything. Every injury. Every threat. Every humiliation. Every attempt to seek help. And every door that closed in her face. There was one final entry. Short. Only 3 sentences. James read it again. Then a third time. Finally he handed the diary to the magistrate. The man read the final page. His face lost all color. "What happens now?" he asked quietly. James looked toward the window. Snow was beginning to fall. Small white flakes drifting across dark Yorkshire sky. What happened now? Simple. The execution was tomorrow morning. And for the first time since arriving in Newgate Prison, James Ashcroft no longer believed Eleanor Whitmore had been sentenced by mistake. He believed she had been condemned deliberately. Someone had wanted her silenced. Someone powerful. Someone who had shaped the investigation from the beginning. And if that was true, then Eleanor wasn't merely a prisoner. She was evidence. And evidence had a way of making dangerous people desperate. James Ashcroft returned to Newgate before dawn. Not because the execution was scheduled for 9. Because someone had attempted to kill Eleanor during the night. The attempt had failed only because the prison matron happened to enter the corridor unexpectedly and found a man standing outside Eleanor's cell with a key he should not have possessed. The man had disappeared before he could be detained. Which told James everything he needed to know. Someone was frightened. Very frightened. Powerful people rarely panicked when they believed the truth would remain buried. They panicked when they sensed it was beginning to surface. The prison governor met him at the entrance. His face was pale. "Your Grace." The prisoner. "Alive." James nodded once. "Good. The matron insists on speaking with you." "Where is she?" "Waiting." He found her in a small administrative office overlooking the prison yard. She stood immediately when he entered. A practical woman. 50 years old. The sort of person who had seen enough suffering to recognize it instantly. "You interrupted something last night." She nodded. "Yes. Tell me." The matron took a breath. The man had a prison key. "Interesting. Very interesting. Only staff possess those." "Exactly." James felt his suspicions deepen. "Did you recognize him?" "No. But..." She hesitated. "He wasn't behaving like a criminal." "Explain." "He moved like a gentleman." The room became quiet. A gentleman. Which narrowed the possibilities considerably. A gentleman carrying prison keys in the middle of the night. A gentleman attempting to reach a condemned woman whose execution was less than 12 hours away. A gentleman who disappeared the moment someone saw him. The implications were obvious. Someone wasn't trying to silence a murderer. Someone was trying to silence a witness. James thanked the matron. Then walked directly to Eleanor's cell. The guard unlocked the door. She was awake. Of course she was. People rarely slept well when strangers attempted murder during the night. She sat on the narrow cot with a blanket around her shoulders. The moment she saw him, she knew something had changed. You know. It wasn't a question. James entered. Closed the door behind him. Someone visited your corridor. Her face remained expressionless. Too expressionless. The kind produced by practice. Not surprise. Recognition. You expected it. Silence. Eleanor. She looked toward the window. Gray morning light filtered through iron bars. Eventually she spoke. They're running out of time. James folded his arms. Who? The people who helped him. Finally. A crack. Small. But real. Him. My husband. James waited. The silence stretched. Then Eleanor made a decision. He could see it happening. The internal calculation. The weighing of consequences. Finally she looked at him. My husband wasn't working alone. There it was. The truth had finally begun. James pulled a chair forward. Sat down. And listened. For the next hour Eleanor told him everything. Not dramatically. Not emotionally. Methodically. Like an accountant reconstructing a ledger. Which, James realized, was exactly what she was doing. Her husband had not simply stolen money. He had built an entire network. A system. Investments redirected. Documents altered. Assets moved. Names hidden. Powerful people protected. The fraud involved judges. Bankers. Parliamentary advisors. Men whose reputations were worth fortunes. Men who could not afford exposure. James listened carefully. Every detail fit. Every piece aligned with evidence already gathered. And then she reached the final part. The night her husband died. The room became very quiet. He invited me to the study. James said nothing. He knew I'd discovered the final ledger. How? He underestimated how much I understood. A familiar mistake. Many men made it. Especially around intelligent women. He wanted me to alter the records. And you refused. Yes. Silence. What happened next? For the first time her composure faltered. Not much. Just enough. He became angry. James waited. He locked the door. The Duke's jaw tightened. He said if I wouldn't help willingly, I would help eventually. Silence. The kind that grows heavier with every second. Then. I thought he was going to kill me. James remained perfectly still. What happened? Eleanor looked at her hands. I picked up the ledger. The ledger. Yes. And? I threw it at him. James blinked. You threw a ledger. Very hard. The image was unexpectedly absurd. And somehow entirely believable. What happened then? He shouted. Silence. He stood up. Another pause. Then. And then he died. James stared at her. Died. He grabbed his chest. The room became very still. He collapsed. A heart attack. Yes. Nothing else. No poison. No weapon. No struggle. Just a man whose own rage destroyed him. James sat back slowly. The implications were staggering. Not only was Eleanor innocent. The entire prosecution case was fiction. Built upon assumptions. Protected by corruption. Sustained by people who benefited from her conviction. The cell remained silent. Then Eleanor asked a question. One she had apparently been carrying for months. Why are you helping me? James looked at her. A fair question. Perhaps the fairest. Because even now she didn't understand. Most people didn't understand James Ashcroft. They saw wealth, power, influence. What they missed was the thing underneath. The reason he spent his life hunting corruption. The reason powerful men hated him. My father. The word surprised her. James rarely spoke about family. He trusted the wrong people. Silence. They destroyed him. Eleanor listened. He wasn't innocent. The Duke stared at the prison wall. But he wasn't guilty of what they claimed either. A long pause. And nobody cared about the difference. The truth hung between them. James stood. My father taught me something. What? He looked directly at her. The most dangerous thing in England isn't a criminal. Silence. It's a lie that powerful people agree to repeat. Neither spoke. Because both understood exactly what that meant. A knock interrupted them. The prison governor entered. Breathless. Pale. Alarmed. Your Grace. James turned. What is it? The governor swallowed. There are men outside. What men? Parliamentary investigators. Interesting. Very interesting. Because Parliament had shown absolutely no interest in Eleanor Holt yesterday. Or last week. Or the week before. The governor continued. They're demanding immediate custody of the prisoner. Silence. James felt something cold settle inside him. Not fear. Anticipation. Because desperate people were finally beginning to reveal themselves. And that meant he was getting close. Very close. The Duke smiled. Not pleasantly. Then he picked up his coat. And headed toward the prison gates. Because whoever had come for Eleanor this morning was about to discover exactly why England called him the most dangerous duke in the kingdom. The men from Parliament arrived expecting cooperation. They received James Ashcroft instead. Which was considerably worse. The prison gates opened. 6 men entered. 2 investigators. 3 legal representatives. 1 parliamentary secretary whose expression suggested he had spent the carriage journey rehearsing authority. James waited for them in the prison courtyard. Snow drifted through the morning air. The execution platform stood visible behind him. A reminder. A warning. The secretary stepped forward. Your Grace. Mr. Harrow. The man's surprise was immediate. James knew his name. James usually knew everyone's name. That was one reason people found him difficult. We are here on official business. I assumed as much. The prisoner. James said nothing. The matter now falls under parliamentary jurisdiction. Interesting. Very interesting. Because parliamentary jurisdiction had not existed yesterday. Or the day before. Or at any point during Eleanor's trial. The Duke folded his hands behind his back. On what grounds? The secretary produced papers. Prepared. Expensive. Urgent. Which meant someone had moved quickly. The prisoner possesses information relating to financial matters currently under review. James almost smiled. Almost. Financial matters. Such elegant language. Such careful language. The sort men used when trying not to say conspiracy. Indeed. The secretary continued. Parliament therefore requires immediate access. No. The answer arrived instantly. The secretary blinked. I beg your pardon. No. Silence. The snowfall seemed louder. One investigator stepped forward. Your Grace, I do not believe you understand. James looked at him. The man immediately wished he had remained silent. No. The Duke's voice was calm. I understand perfectly. A long pause. Then. You ignored her while she was useful. Nobody spoke. You ignored her when she was accused. Silence. You ignored her while she was convicted. More silence. You ignored her while she waited to die. The words landed like stones. James stepped closer. Not aggressively. Simply enough. And now that she threatens people with influence, suddenly Parliament has discovered an interest. Nobody answered. Because there was no answer. The secretary tried another approach. Your Grace, this is larger than one woman. James nodded. Yes. A pause. It is. Then his eyes hardened. Which is precisely why she stays under my protection. The meeting ended shortly afterward. Not because Parliament agreed. Because Parliament understood. The Duke of Blackthorn was not moving. And nobody present possessed enough authority to make him. By noon Eleanor had been transferred from Newgate Prison. Not to freedom. Not yet. To Blackthorn House. The largest private residence in London. The safest place James could think of. The carriage journey was quiet. Neither spoke much. Both had too much to consider. When they arrived, Eleanor stood at the base of the marble staircase and stared upward. It looked like another world. Which, in many ways, it was. She had begun the morning expecting execution. Now she stood inside one of the most powerful households in England. Life could be strange. A housekeeper appeared. Efficient. Kind-eyed. Entirely unafraid of dukes. My lady. Eleanor blinked. The title felt absurd. The housekeeper smiled gently. Your room is ready. Eleanor followed her upstairs. For the first time in 11 days she entered a room with no bars. No locks. No guards. Just a fire. A bed. A window overlooking London. She sat slowly on the edge of the mattress. And cried. Not dramatically. Not loudly. Just enough. Enough for 11 days. Enough for 6 years. Enough for a life spent surviving. Downstairs, James worked. Because that was what he did. Evidence accumulated. Witnesses appeared. Ledgers emerged. Documents surfaced. And one by one, powerful men began realizing their protection was disappearing. The first arrest happened 3 days later. The second happened the next morning. By the end of the week 4 individuals connected to the fraud network were under investigation. The newspapers erupted. Questions followed. Then more questions. The official medical review reached its conclusion 8 days later. Lord Henry Whitmore had died of natural causes. Massive cardiac failure. No poison. No violence. No murder. Exactly as Eleanor had always said. The conviction collapsed immediately. The judge responsible resigned before the inquiry reached him. Several prosecutors suddenly retired. 2 banking officials attempted to leave England. Neither succeeded. 14 days after her scheduled execution, Eleanor received a document. A single sheet. Stamped. Signed. Official. Her complete exoneration. She read it once. Then placed it on the desk. James watched from across the study. That's all. She looked up. What? The reaction. A small smile appeared. The first genuine smile he had seen from her. I've been busy. James glanced toward the mountain of documents surrounding her. Because while everyone else had been fighting over her innocence, Eleanor had discovered 4 additional fraud mechanisms hidden inside dormant estate ledgers. Mechanisms nobody else had noticed. Not solicitors. Not accountants. Not investigators. Her. Only her. James shook his head. You were nearly executed. Yes. And your response is more accounting. She considered that. Then nodded. That seems accurate. For the first time in weeks, James laughed. Actually laughed. The sound surprised both of them. Months passed. Spring arrived. The scandal expanded. Restitution funds were created. Families recovered stolen investments. Careers ended. Reputations collapsed. Justice, imperfect as it was, finally appeared. And then one afternoon Eleanor entered James's study carrying a folder. He immediately recognized the expression. Determination. A dangerous sign. What now? She placed the folder on his desk. Our arrangement. James leaned back. I see. No. She folded her arms. You don't. Interesting. Very interesting. Explain. She did. Calmly. Directly. Completely. She had not survived execution, corruption, prison, and scandal merely to become decorative. She would not spend the rest of her life hidden inside somebody else's household. She would not become an asset. An ornament. A convenient story. She wanted partnership. Actual partnership. Silence followed. Then James stood. Walked around the desk. And sat beside her on the library floor. Among ledgers. Documents. Open books. The natural habitat of both of them. Eleanor stared. What are you doing? Learning. She blinked. Learning what? Your filing system. The answer arrived without hesitation. James looked at the stacks of records. Then at her. You built systems nobody else understands. Silence. I'd like to understand them. Something changed in her expression. Small. But real. For perhaps the first time since Newgate, she allowed herself to believe something different might be possible. Not rescue. Not gratitude. Not obligation. Partnership. The following morning they summoned the estate solicitor. 8 o'clock sharp. The man arrived expecting a routine meeting. Instead he found the Duke and Eleanor surrounded by ledgers. Working together. Correcting calculations. Planning restitution. Rebuilding systems. The solicitor stared. Then slowly smiled. Because the truth had become obvious. The woman who had arrived at Newgate prison awaiting execution was gone. In her place stood something considerably more dangerous. A woman fully seen. Fully respected. And entirely impossible to dismiss. Years later, when people spoke of the Duke of Blackthorn and his wife, they rarely mentioned the execution. Or the scandal. Or the fraud investigation. They spoke instead of what followed. The reforms. The financial systems. The thousands of families protected from corruption. The strange partnership between England's most feared Duke and the woman who had once been sentenced to die. And if anyone asked James Ashcroft why he had intervened on that November morning, he always gave the same answer. I did not save her. Then he would glance toward Eleanor. Usually surrounded by ledgers. Usually correcting something everyone else had missed. And he would smile. England was about to lose her. There is a difference.